The last thing you have was
Was
counterculture?
counterculture. Yes.
Counterculture, okay. And what do you have about counterculture?
About like it's like the hippies and that kind of stuff,
Okay,
like that kind of stuff. And then we also talked about like the second wave of feminism with like the birth control and like how like women are able to get like even more rights.
okay. We were talking, oh, because you were on my old slides, that's right. And we were talking about some of the sexual
Yes.
revolution stuff. That's
Mhm.
why. That's why you were on my old slides. That's why. Okay. All right. So let's pick up. I want to. We need to finish off the Vietnam War real quick. Okay. So let's make this the next big letter.
Okay. C.
The next big number C.
Yep.
All right. So for number C, we're going to call it Vietnamization. Vietnamization. So Vietnamization is President Nixon's plan to end the Vietnam War. It's President Nixon's plan to end the Vietnam War, and he is ending the Vietnam War by expanding the war, by expanding it, making it bigger. Okay, so he's, in order to bring our troops home, he must add a lot of troops. In order to stop the bombing, he must increase the bombing first. Okay, so he's going to add more troops, he's going to increase the draft, add more troops, and do more bombing. Most prominently, what he's going to do is Nixon is going to order the bombing of these two countries, Laos, right here, Laos, and Cambodia. Laos and Cambodia. You're not supposed to say the S in Laos. You're supposed to say Lao. But Laos and Cambodia. Okay. Now, why did Nixon do this? The reason he did this is because the North Vietnamese soldiers had been hiding in these countries and walking down these countries and like transporting down in these countries in the jungles there, and then popping into Vietnam to do attacks. Right. So the North Vietnamese have been using these two countries on the side to hide and then pop in and do attacks on Americans. So here's the issue. Nixon bombs, he's going to start bombing these two countries. He starts sending planes over and starts dropping napalm and dropping bombs in Cambodia and in Laos, especially Cambodia. Starts dropping bombs in these two countries and does immense damage, immense death toll in these countries. And he never tells the countries. He never tells the countries, he just does it. And he never declares war on the countries. He just does it, which is it's in violation of international law. So here's a picture. This is a modern day picture of rice fields in Cambodia, right? And you can see all the bombing holes.
Mm-hmm.
These are from American bombs. Cambodia today still has major problems because of these bombs. Okay.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Like, what enforces international law, and like what like decides is like international law? Because like no one like rules the world and is like, this is the international law.
Yeah. That's a smart question, and you're kind of tapping into one of the problems with international law.
Yeah.
Because there's no police.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's not there's like a country above all like country, or like just like a person that's like, no, you can't do that, because it's like,
there isn't, right? Like if you post a speed limit in my neighborhood that's 10 miles an hour, but no police officer ever comes, is the speed limit really 10 miles an hour?
no.
Right? That becomes a problem, right? That at a certain really kind of fundamental level, a law only exists if someone is willing to enforce the law. Here's the problem with international law. International law basically exists as an agreement between countries. So the United States has signed a bunch of these treaties, and we've agreed to behave ourselves, and we've agreed to act in a certain way. Well, if we don't act in a certain way, other countries can retaliate. They can like cut off trade, or they can bomb us or attack us or something, right? But if you're like the biggest, most toughest country in the world, and you are bombing, a little country like Cambodia,
Yeah.
like what is Cambodia going to do about it?
Mhm.
And that's kind of where Nixon is, right? Nixon kind of exists in that moment where he says, "What are you going to do about it?" Right.
Mhm.
Well, one of the big problems with this is this actually sends Cambodia into a civil war. Cambodia was already like on the edge of a civil war, but the American bombing campaign actually causes a communist uprising in Cambodia. And it's an uprising called the Khmer Rouge. And the Khmer Rouge is going to go on and commit genocide against millions of people in their country. You're gonna have like pyramids of skulls in their countries and stuff, right? Like it's a nightmare. It causes so much destruction and so much death. Um, yeah, I this is basically just the U.S. being bad. The U.S. is behaving badly, right? Which is so profoundly unpopular to Americans. It's really important to Americans that our government is good, right? We want our government to be good, right? We teach classes on American history and American government, and we make our kids do these because we want our country to be good. We want you to be invested in a good country, right? But
Mhm.
the fact of the matter is that our country is populated with people who sometimes are not good, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes we're bad. Sometimes we do bad things, right? And the only thing that you can really kind of hope for is that we can regulate ourselves, and we can, right? Nixon is one of these moments in history where the country is doing bad, and the country is kind of just existing in a state of badness, in to a degree, right? We have a lot of this kind of stuff, right? Like slavery, right? How does the land of the free accept slavery,
Mhm.
right? How does a land where all men are created equal? How do we accept Jim Crow laws, the Jim Crow South, right? How do we accept killing the natives? How do we accept any of these things?
Mhm.
And that's the answer is that we're not perfect, and that we're kind of always trying to be better. And sometimes we're better and sometimes we're not. This is one of the moments where I think pretty clearly we are not.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm sorry I don't have like a solid answer for you, but like
Uh-huh.
I think I gave you a truthful answer. it's it's not a totally convenient, solid answer. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, let's talk about some of the aftermath of this, right? So we're gonna have two big aftermaths. One big aftermath is, and I would keep this as part of Vietnamization, keep this in the same number. So one of the big aftermaths is we're going to get massive, massive anti-war protests, bigger than before, bigger anti-war protests across the entire country. And the United States is more and more growing tired of these anti-war protests, right? And Nixon has no patience for anti-war protests. Like he does not like these at all, right? He has no patience for hippies, no patience for this kind of stuff. One of the worst examples is at Kent State. It's what we call the Kent State Massacre. The Kent State Massacre, and the Kent State is in Ohio. It's in Ohio, and there's a huge demonstration of protesters at the university, college students at the university protesting, and Ohio sends the National Guard in to go stop the protesters uh, because they claim that the protesters are going to become violent. There's basically no evidence that the protesters were going to become violent, though a lot of the protesters were doing drugs. Um, and the Ohio National Guard opens fire on the protesters. They shoot the protesters. They kill 4 and they injure 9 during this time period. And this picture is the most famous picture from the massacre. Of course, this is one of the protesting women, crying that next to her friend that has just been killed. So this is the army killing American citizens at a university. And the university is supposed to be a place of free speech, right? If there's anywhere where you have free speech, it should be a school, a place where you are exploring, new ideas and exploring morality and exploring questions of ethics and things, right? You should be free to speak in a school, and the protesters were shot at. This is used as kind of evidence against Nixon. Nixon doesn't have anything to do with this. Obviously, this is Ohio doing their thing, right? But Nixon speaks in a way where he basically says the protesters are going to get what they deserve. That if you're opposing the government, if you're opposing these things, you're going to get what you deserve, right? This kind of, is a cold way to look at things. Nixon is very famous for famously. He's one of the very. I think. I'm pretty sure he's the first president to kind of declare the world as us versus them. And when he says us versus them, the them, other Americans. Was that you? Was that?
Yeah, that was my top just going. I got a text.
All right. So here's the other consequence. So massive protests at home. But the other consequence is he uses it as kind of leverage to kind of break the politics of the Cold War. Okay. There's a quote, right? A phrase, only Nixon could go to China. Only Nixon could go to China. This is all part of Vietnamization. And Nixon was famously conservative, right? Famously conservative. He was famously anti-communist. He expands the war. He spends a lot of his time damaging, hurting, destroying communism. He became famous attacking communists, right, during the McCarthy era. He became famous like attacking Hollywood and stuff like that. This is how Nixon rose to power, right? In 1972, Nixon does something that makes the whole world kind of record scratch, right? Because the whole world is like, wait, what? Nixon decides to fly to China and meet with Mao Zedong, the Chinese communist leader, and formally recognizes the legitimacy of communist China. He flies to Beijing and shakes his hand and basically sets up the beginnings of a political relationship where we can actually start trading with China. Now, at this point in time, people were flipping out because people were like, what? Oh my God, are we going to recognize communist China now? Right? But Nixon is really, really smart on this issue. He recognizes that if you think about this, we have the Soviet Union and then we have communist China, right? Soviet Union and China. They're both communists. They're both allied together. They both sent troops into the Korean War. They both sent troops into the Vietnam War, right? And the world had been thinking that Soviet Union and China were like one political alliance. Okay? The world prior to this, the world had thought of the Soviet Union and China as one political allied group. Nixon looks at it and he says, I think that the Soviets, the Russians, and the Chinese don't like each other. He says, for 1,000 years, Russia and China have not liked each other. And that Russia and China have gone to war with each other. They've had border conflicts with each other. They've shot at each other. They don't like each other. He says, the only thing unifying them is communism. But Nixon says, I think I can tap into something else. I can tap into this like ancient kind of hatred between the people. And so he goes to China and he's gambling here, right? He's taking a gamble. He says, I think that if I negotiate with China, that the Soviets will flip out. And it worked. It worked. He went to China and he basically agreed to have future agreements. That's all the agreement was. Like he didn't give money, he didn't get weapons, he didn't, get them to pull out of Vietnam. He didn't do any of that stuff. He just agreed to have future agreements. And that is enough to send the Soviets into a tizzy about this, right? They get really upset. Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviets, he invites Nixon to Moscow, right? Here's Brezhnev right here. He is about 90% eyebrows, if you look at him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are some significant eyebrows, right? Yeah. It's like a mustache over each one of his eyes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Brezhnev invites Nixon over a couple of months later, right? Nixon meets Mao in February and then Brezhnev in May. And when Nixon shows up in the Soviet Union, this is the first time where we're really going to start getting a negotiation with the Soviet Union. That the Soviet Union is going to start saying, "Oh my God, are you going to go after our good buddy?" And Nixon says, "Well, I don't know. I'm just exploring my options." And so they start to negotiate. The result here is that they're eventually going to agree to stop supporting Vietnam. And we're going to start pulling out of Vietnam. It's going to take a few more years to get out of Vietnam. It'll take a few more years to get out, but the United States will get out of Vietnam, and the Vietnamese will almost immediately get overrun and taken over by communism. So the Vietnamese, the communists, the Viet Cong, the communists from the north, they win. They win, we withdraw, and they win, and the Vietnam War is over. Okay. Did we do? Did you do the Stonewall riots?
No.
No. Okay. So let's do. I'm trying to think how much time we have. How much time do we have until my other class gets on?
10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, we're just going to leave this for now. I'll leave this for now because we can link it to some other things. So we'll link these things together. Yeah, let's do the Pentagon Papers real quick because that is kind of linked to the Vietnam War, right?
We want this new letter.
Yeah, go ahead and make a new letter, Pentagon Papers. So in 1971, this guy right here, Daniel Ellsberg is a political activist, right? He's a political activist, and he gets papers leaked from the Pentagon, right? Military papers leaked from the Pentagon about the Vietnam War. Now, a lot of these papers were written by this man here, Robert McNamara. So Robert McNamara was the Secretary of Defense under John F. Kennedy and under Johnson. He was both Kennedy and Johnson's Secretary of Defense. And McNamara is one of the guys who's most responsible for starting this Vietnam War. Okay, this guy right here. He's one of the guys most responsible for starting the Vietnam War. But after the Vietnam War got started, McNamara had kind of a change of heart, and he wished that we weren't in the war, and he wanted to get us out of the war. He couldn't get us out of the war because there was all sorts of people involved who wanted us to stay in. And so McNamara started keeping basically a journal, essentially. He started keeping all these reports and writing reports about kind of corruption in the government, about how like weapons companies were forcing us to stay in the war, and how military officials were lobbying to keep us in the war, and how all these other groups were like forcing us to stay in the war, right? McNamara starts writing about all these things. And then after LBJ loses, right, McNamara is fired, of course, right, and Nixon hires a new guy. But those papers all still existed. Those papers get smuggled out and given to Ellsberg, who then publishes them for everyone to see in the country. And the Pentagon Papers basically expose corruption in the government, mostly Johnson, in the Johnson administration, when we're talking about the Vietnam War, mostly about how they completely screwed up the war and made it way, way, way worse than it needed to be, right? And this gets exposed. Now, the Pentagon Papers are about Johnson, but this immediately starts translating into the public being angry at Nixon as well, right? Because they start saying, we've already seen Nixon lie to us. Nixon told us that he was not bombing Cambodia, and yet he is. He told us he was not bombing Laos, and yet he is. He told us that he was going to end the war, and yet he did not, right? And now Johnson, the guy we thought was honest, was also lying to us, right? And so this makes Americans even more upset at the war. Nixon calls Ellsberg the most dangerous man in America because Nixon says that this guy is going to undermine the American soldiers, undermine American democracy by exposing these things, right? Ellsberg says, I'm exposing corruption and liars. I'm not wrong, right? Like, I should be exposing corruption and liars. That's what you should do. This is going to start us on the pathway towards Nixon's downfall, because people are going to start investigating Nixon for all sorts of stuff, right? And they're going to reveal a lot of corruption. They're going to reveal that Nixon is actually lying about a lot of stuff. So eventually Nixon is, here's a spoiler for you, but Nixon's going to resign. He's going to resign. He's the only president that's ever resigned. And he's going to resign because he has just mountains of corruption. Yeah. But Ellsberg is kind of the guy who, he didn't realize fully what he was doing, but he kind of set us on that path. Okay?
Okay.
I think that's a good place to stop. I think that's a good place to stop. I'm going to stop the recording.